Hey there, and welcome back to the channel. If you're going to trim windows, it's probably going to come along at some point where you're going to need to do an apron or stool detail. And what I've got laid out here on the assembly table is a typical installation that I would see for a stool / apron trim piece along with our standard mitered casing. This is piece of casing assembled with hyper just a little bit earlier today. As you can see, plenty strong to move around. Now, whenever you're going to execute a stool or apron detail on a window, the way you go about it is going to depend a little bit on the type of window installation you have and on whether or not you have extension jambs already installed on the window. In my case here, I have Anderson windows installed, and the extension jambs come with the window installed, and it's all the way out flush with the drywall on all four sides of the window. That being said, we're not going to have a stool, which is the top piece, going all the way back in the form of an extension jamb. A lot of times in different window applications, your stool detail, which is this top piece, and then your apron detail, which is the bottom piece, are two different pieces. And this stool might actually be quite a bit wider and go all the way back in the form of an extension jamb. In this case, we don't have this two-piece detail. Whenever you're in a situation like I have, when your extension jambs are already installed, you can get a piece of molding like this. It almost looks like casing, but as you can see, it's really designed to be used as a stool / apron all in one piece. So it's fast to install. All you've got to do is do mitered returns on the ends, nail it on the window, and you're good to go, and it looks fantastic. Next, I'm going to show you how we go about getting the measurements for the stool / apron detail using a basic jig to mark out where the end of the apron stool will be. To get started with this process, I went ahead and I made a jig to mark where the ends of the stool / apron will be at on the window wall area. That way I could take measurements and I can ensure that I had the correct measurement, because I like to batch cut these. Here's my first window. I just got done installing this, and you can see this detail here. Now, there are a couple of key principles that you want to look for whenever you're doing this. First thing, you'll notice how this outside edge of the window casing continues down, and this edge is plumb with this edge on my apron. That's a nice detail. If at all possible, you want that to align on that plane. I want to point out a couple of the keys to a good design with your different components coming together here. I like the thickness that I have in front of the deepest part of the casing right here to be the same on the back side here. So I have a 1/2 inch past the casing here and a 1/2 inch past the thickest portion up here. The thickness of this stool / apron molding is 1 1/4 inches thick. This is 3/4 of an inch thick. That allows that miter to meet the corner of the casing. So this looks really nice the way we have the miter terminating into the corner of the casing, and we've got the same reveal on the side here and off of the front here, which is a 1/2 inch both ways. And then of course the other key is we want this outside edge of the casing to be plumb with this edge of the apron right here, which it is. So this is a great design and combination of trim. Having the appropriate trim apron detail selected to match the casing is crucial. We've got a great combination here where all of our reveals and the edges lining up in plane are going to look really nice. You will notice I have a pencil mark right here. You'll see it here also. I start off by making a jig. I figure out what my reveal is. So I've got a 1/4 inch reveal off of my jamb, and then my casing is 3 1/2 inches thick, and then I knew I needed another 1/2 inch past that to be all the way at the edge of the stool. That came out to, I believe, 4 1/4 inches, which is what this board is. Just nail another piece of scrap onto the edge like so. We've got a nice jig. so you can go along and mark on each window where the outside edge of that stool apron detail will be. And it's really easy if you've got this offset to where you can just flip it as you work your way around. And it makes, whenever you're installing things, you can ensure that that edge lines up with your pencil mark. And also whenever you're measuring, you can double check your measurements to make sure you're adding the correct amount. So if I want to get my measurement here, I'll just take my jig, put it along here, lightly mark that outside edge, bring it over to the opposite side, and again, lightly mark that outside edge. Now I know that this offset is 4 1/4 inches, doubled, that's 8 1/2 inches total is what I need to add from the inside dimension that I have here. So there's a couple ways I can get my overall length of measurement. I can just measure from my pencil marks and do it that way, or I can hold off on the inside of my jamb at 8 1/2 inches, hold it even right there, and come over to the other side and take my measurement. So 8 1/2 inches here, and then I see over here I've got 34 3/4. To double check myself, I can then go to my pencil mark and I've got 34 3/4, so I know that's correct. Many of you are probably familiar with what a mitered return is. We need the profile of the molding to wrap all the way around, and the way that we achieve that is by creating a mitered return. So we'll miter a small piece of trim that will cap this end off to give us this detail where the molding wraps all the way around. I'll show you how to do that next, and we'll talk about a couple different ways to attach this small return piece. All right, here we go. If you're not familiar with the process, the way you achieve a mitered return is very simple. You're just going to make a 45-degree cut on one end of the board, and then from the back side, you'll make a square cut across that line, and that gives you your return piece. And then, let me just show you here, you make another 45-degree cut on the end of your board, and that piece can then cap off the end like so, and you'll glue or pin that on, and that terminates the end of a board nicely, crown molding, whatever it may be. There are basically two schools of thought whenever you're cutting your mitered returns, and I use both different ways of doing this depending on the situation. You can either batch cut your mitered returns so that you have a bunch of right pieces and left pieces, or you can do what I just did and start with one end of the board, cut your return, cut your full piece, and then cut your return for the other end. The advantage of doing what I just did is if you're using a piece of molding and your moldings are not all exactly milled the same, what can happen is if you batch cut a bunch of mitered returns and that particular piece of molding happens to not match up with the rest of your molding, you've got a bunch of just not great mitered returns. The other thing that can happen is if you're using a mitered return on, say, a large crown molding or something like that, each particular piece might be cupped or milled a little bit differently than the other, so you can get a better match if you make your mitered return directly beside where your miter is going to be on the board. So you're taking those cuts from as close to the same area as possible. You'll get better alignment that way. In this case, I could do it either way, but I only have about 10 or so aprons to do on this level. So I'll probably just do it like I showed you. No need to batch cut 10 different returns. Now the question is, how will we attach this return piece to the end of the board? Typically, there's going to be two ways that I would do this. I would either use CA glue by itself with no nails, or you can use regular wood glue and a couple of pin nails. I kind of like the CA glue because it sets up instantly and I don't have to shoot any nail holes in it. And as you can see, this is CA glued and it just looks really nice. So that's usually what I opt for. If you're not familiar with what CA glue is, it's basically two-part glue. You've got glue and activator. The great thing is that it sets up instantly, and this is perfect for mitered returns. These joints are not going to be stressed, so we don't need something super strong, but this is going to be perfect and plenty strong enough for this type of application. The one disadvantage, you've got to have fast hands and be good at aligning things quickly. If you're not, you may want to opt for regular wood glue and a 23 gauge pin nailer. I kind of like the 2P10 simply because it just finishes off so nice and you don't have any nail holes then. So that's usually what I go with. The trick to use CA glue in aligned pieces is use as many different ways to help yourself align as possible. So I'm actually using the surface of my miter saw wings, which will align the bottom flush. So that's one surface I won't have to worry about aligning. The other thing to do is use your fingers on an edge. So I'll use my thumb here on the bottom edge as well as on the top to rock this into place and get that set up. This sets up basically instantly, so if you don't get it right the first time, you're not going to be able to move it around. You've just got to put it right into place perfectly. So let's go ahead and just glue this up. You don't want to get glue squeezing out, but just a portion about like that is all you need. And then we'll go ahead, spray the activator on the opposite side. Again, I'll make it so that it's pressed firmly down on the table. Use my thumb on this front edge here, and then here at the top, I'm just carefully going to watch it to get that aligned, apply some pressure in the center, and just like that, that is assembled perfectly. It's glued, ready to go, no nail holes. If you get it slightly out of alignment, just take a little bit of sandpaper and touch it up, but this is basically perfect and ready to go just like that. We'll flip the board over and do the opposite side now. Again, apply some glue like so. Spray your activator on there. Get that front edge close to perfect as possible. Push firmly. There we are again. If you want to, you can take your sandpaper and just kind of lightly touch the edge. You want to make sure you're always going straight in line whenever you're sanding, because you don't want to round over this corner. You want to keep that corner nice and sharp. So make sure you're always going like so whenever you sand this, and that'll ensure that that corner stays nice and crisp. What we don't want to be doing is rounding over this edge very much at all. It looks much better if it stays nice and crisp. The nice thing about this detail is it's very easy to install these and get the stool apron look without much work. So you can see here you got the standard Anderson window jamb right there, and you just shoot a 15 gauge 2.5 inch nail into that and try and get it at the right angle so it doesn't shoot out the top of your extension jamb. But it looks really nice, finishes off well. One thing I will note, whenever I do these returns, this whole area will be covered by the casing. And I do like to make the return, whenever I cut that return cut on it, I like to make it so that it's slightly wider than a true zeroed return. So you can see it's a little bit thicker right there. That allows, in case the extension jamb on the window is out proud of the drywall, it'll make so that this back side of the trim sits nice and tight to the drywall. Making that return slightly longer than it should be is going to allow this to sit nice and tight to the drywall. It'll be easier for the painter to caulk and cut a really nice line to. Whereas if you've got a gap right there, it's not ideal. Sometimes these jambs will be proud of the drywall, and the easiest way to kind of take care of that is just to cut that return just a little bit longer than it actually technically should be. I suppose I should also mention you also may need to use the old planer at times. Show you what that looks like. Basically, if you get into situations where your jamb material is proud of the drywall to the point that it's going to make the trim look bad, it doesn't take very long to take your planer and you can plane this down flush with the drywall and make it look perfect the way that it should be. You know, if it's kind of out 1/8 of an inch or more, usually going to bust out the planer to fix that. All right, guys, it is the end of the day. It's time for me to go home, but kind of wanted to show you how this is done. It's a lot of fun installing, you know, putting mitered returns together. Just looks so nice whenever you get that molding wrapping around like that. It's a lot of fun. Nice look, nice detail inside a home. You'll probably have to do it at some point if you're trimming professionally. And I hope that this video was helpful for you guys, especially who are starting out, kind of learning this stuff, trying to see how some of these more basic things are done. Mitered returns, I love CA glue personally. There's no nail holes left and it looks fantastic. Plenty strong for this type of application, and it works really well. Let me know how you do it in the comments section. Let me know if you've got any other questions. I always try and read the comments. But thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next video.